Hello, I'm Lydia, and today I'm going to show you how to make a wet felted large blue butterfly. Now, wet felt uses wool fleece and friction, soap and water to bond all of the fibres together. And the materials you're going to need for this project today are some wool fleece in blues and greens, whites and a bit of grey. You're going to need a piece of block soap, gentle block soap, preferably with no perfume. It needs to be gentle to look after your hands. I'm using olive oil soap today. You need a piece of bubble wrap. This is a piece that I've cut out of one of those used padded envelopes, so they come out nicely. You need a piece of hand towel. Old, not your best. This is a piece of old towel that I've got. You need a piece of netting or an old tea towel. An old tea towel, so long as it's sort of a bit worn out, will work. You need something to transfer your soapy water to your surface. So I'm using just a 1 pint cleaned out milk bottle, and I've poked some holes in the end to let the soapy water out. Don't put too many in at first, try it out. And then you need something to add your friction. So you've got your bubble wrap, but also a rolling pin would work, a piece of, this is old insulating material from pipes. And if you can find one of these in your charity shop or something, this is a sushi mat, you could use one of those too. But you don't actually need any of those, because you can use your hands for the friction. Rolling pin is your best bet though. Okay, so I've drawn the template, around the template for my butterfly. And what I'm going to do is I want to cut this out, and I want to make sure I retain the negative space around the outside, but I'm also going to keep the inside. And the best way to do that is if you just fold along one of the lines and then snip it so that you can drop your scissors into the hole, and then just cut round like that so that you can cut your shape out and it keeps its shape. Okay, so I've cut out the two bits of the template. I've got my positive. I'm going to put that to one side, and we're going to be using the negative, and we're going to lay it on the wool as we're working with the wet wool. So it is going to get soggy, so you're going to have to look after it, but also you can always make another one. So what we're going to do is we're going to lay down our surface that we're going to do the wool on. And because I've got one, I'm going to lay down this sushi mat. But if you haven't got one, honestly, don't worry about it. I'm going to put my old bit of toweling down, and I'm going to lay my bubble wrap on top. In fact, I'm going to turn it that way because we're going to be doing a rectangle. I've got a spare towel here because when my hands start to get wet in a bit, I don't want to be wetting all my wool. So I need to make sure that I'm keeping my hands dry when I'm using dry stuff. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to lay down some green. So I'm laying down some green. I'm working to about this size. So according to the worksheet, it's about 15 centimetres. But please note, it is going to shrink. Now, it does kind of depend on the wool that you're using. Some wool shrinks better than others. Some wet felt's better than others, but that's what we're working on. So what I've got here to the side, if I just show you, because I've got a nice dry space, I've got different types of wool. And the wools that you can get hold of, you can get some really lovely soft tops that have been combed out, and then you can get some quite much more hairy wool. What we're looking for today's workshop is we're looking for fairly fine wool. The types of wool you can get are Blue-Faced Leicester makes a really beautiful bit of wet felt, but it depends on where you're getting it. You can find it in craft shops, you can find it in your charity shops, and you can buy it online, obviously. So when you buy your wool, it's going to come probably in a little ball. So what you need to do is you need to unravel it. One thing to be aware of is that yarn is basically twisted wool. And the point of twisting the wool is to make it really firm. And we don't want firm wool. We want it to be nice and loose and laid out. So when you get your wool, just make sure that it's laid out straight. Now this stuff has been lying in my bag for a few months, so I'm just also going to tease it out a little bit so that you're loosening the fibres. Because what the wool is trying to do at the moment is it's trying to knit together. We're going to be using that natural ability to knit together to make the wet felt. But first of all, we need to make sure that we've stretched our wool out so that we can get pieces off. So we're going to pull off some wool, and I just want to show you this trick with wool. If you try to pull it with your hands very close together, it won't pull. So what you need to be doing is moving your hands out so that you're treating the wool nice and gently. So you pull it out and it will gently just sort of fall apart like that. And what we're looking for is we're going to be taking off lovely soft bits of wool, and we're going to lay them out about 15 to 20 centimetres across there, and I'm going to lay them out in one long line across. So laying it out, I'm going to do a long line across the top. Can you see how the fibres are coming off very finely? That's because my hands are nice and far apart. So I'm laying them in a long line, and then I'm overlapping them a little bit. I'm just going to pull that bit out there. Oops. So you're trying at all times to be very delicate with your wool, laying it out, fill in any little gaps. And then we're going to lie it crossways. So you're crossing the fibres. So what's going to happen is when we add in the soap and water and the friction, there's little scales on the wool, and they're going to open up. And then as we work it more, it's then going to clamp down, and it's that clamping down that makes the wet felt. And you can find this same activity takes place if you've got a long-haired cat. It might do it itself. Some types of dog, they wet felt together, make kind of dreadlocky type bits. It's the same process. Okay, so I've done, because I've gone very thin with my wool, I've done 3 layers. But if you're finding that you're making it slightly thicker, then go for 2 layers. And your hands are going to learn what to do. As you do it, the more you do it, the more your hands will know how it feels. So the next thing is we're going to put our piece of netting over the top, and the netting is there to support the hairs underneath, to stop them moving as we start to work this wool. Okay, so I'm now going to mix the soapy water. And the most important thing at this point is to make sure that any of the wools that you're not using, you need to move those out of the way, okay? So what I've got here is a bit of that block soap, and I've just grated it. And the only reason I do that is that it's faster to melt it in the water. So I've got a bit of hot water in here. It's not the temperature I'm going to be working with, but I'm trying to make sure that it melts really nice and quickly. And then as soon as that's mixed, I'm going to add it into some cold water that's in my water bottle. Okay, so I've transferred the warm water to my milk bottle. I've checked that it's as warm as I feel comfortable with. The warmer, the faster the felt will work. I've also checked that the amount of water coming out the top is about the right amount. We only want to sprinkle a bit on to start with. So once again, just checking that the netting is on top of my wool, and I'm just going to dribble a bit on the surface of the netting. And then what we do is we're going to just gently press down the wool. And as I'm pressing, I can see that it's dimpling. And where the dimples are, that's where there's enough water. And if it's sticking up in little pillows, there's not enough water on there. So I'm just going to put a bit more on there. Make sure I'm not missing the edges. Okay, walking those down. If it's not wet enough, it won't actually felt. And the point of having the towel there, of course, is to mop up too much water. So I think that's about enough. As I'm squashing it, can you see that all of the little pillows have gone? Okay, so the next job is I'm going to put my white on top of this. But what I need to do is take the netting off first. Now the wool wants to sit on the netting, so I'm very gently teasing it back to make sure that I can get my white wool on there. Okay, put that to one side. This is where your spare towel comes in handy, because I'm going to dry my hands so that I'm not touching my dry wool with wet hands. And here I've got a lovely bit of blue face Leicester. Don't forget, untwist it again. Okay, lovely, nice and untwisted. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my piece of paper from the template on the surface, and I'm going to very gently build up a surface of white round the corners. Now, when you laid out your green, we wanted it all even, going that way. With the white, we don't need to worry so much because the wet felting is going to be going on with our base, and the base is going to hold on to our white wool. So you don't need to be quite so precious about it. So what I would do is mess up your wool a bit and then just stick it down very gently, tease it in. And as with the template cutouts, you don't need to be too precious about this. Wet wool and wet felting is a strange combination, and it's going to shrink in different directions. So the purpose of doing this today is learning all about what the wool does and producing a lovely large blue butterfly. But don't be too precious about it, because you'll learn as you go. And we're going to fill that all the way up. Okay, now I've slightly cheated here, because here's one I made earlier. So what you would do is you've finished putting your white down. You would then once more put your netting over the top, and you're going to water it again, and you're just going to press it down gently. Then inside there, you can see the white line coming around there. Inside there, we've got our grey layer. And then on top of that, we've got our blue layer. So we've just got a bit of white, a bit of grey, and then blue. And if you have a look at a picture of the large blue online, you'll find that this grey seeps in here. And as we start to work the wool, the colours are going to meld together a little bit. So I've just wetted this down a little bit. So now is the hard work time. So we're going to put in a bit of elbow grease here. So what we're going to do is we're going to once more wet our surface down. And we are going to start rubbing. Gently at first. Oops, my bubble wrap's moving around. Gently at first. Start rubbing. And you're rubbing in one direction. And let's say we're going to do that 25 times in one direction. Now what you have got to watch at this point is as the wool is trying to felt, what's happening is it's also trying to felt onto the netting. So when you've done it 25 times, very gently tease it off, and if there's any fibres going through your netting, just pull them through and it will show that it's actually starting to work. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn that 90 degrees clockwise. And I'm going to do my 25 rubs that way. Now, as you see that the fibres are starting to take hold underneath, it might not be happening yet, it might happen later, you can start to be a bit firmer. So I want you to imagine we've done this 25 times in 4 different directions. So like that, 25, like that, 25. Another little tip here, as the water is going off into the towel, you might discover that you need to add a bit more soaping. Or you might find that your hands are not actually slipping over the surface really easily. If that's the case, this is where your spare block soap comes in. You just give it a nice rub down, and that will help your hands move more easily, and it will help the felting process. So now we're going to imagine that I have done that 100 times. Hopefully it started to take, which this one has, because I cheated and did a bit earlier. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip that over and do the back side of it, and do that 25 times. Okay, at this point, so I've done it about 100 to 200 times. And what you'll find is that if you pinch the wool, the fibres will not be coming up. They've started to knit together. I mean, not perfectly at this point, but they've started to. So it's at this point that we can start really adding in the friction. And we do that by rolling it. So what we're going to do now is we're going to once more put our netting on top. Make sure it's lying nice and flat. And I'm now going to roll everything up on my rolling pin. And it's at this point that you might want to stand up. So that's what I'm going to do. So we're going to roll 25 times again. Think about how you're laying the pressure on the surface. So I'm making sure that my hands are splayed out. Otherwise you might find one bit is getting more pressure than the other. And we're going to repeat. So just like we did before, we're going to turn it round clockwise. Roll it up. Okay, so I've done it all the way round. So I've done it 200 rolls now. And something to note, that if you don't have a sushi mat or bubble wrap or indeed a rolling pin, there is another way that you can add in the friction. First of all, you'll need to roll it, rub it, maybe an extra few goes round. But another way you can then add in friction is just by using your hands. And actually, this is one of my favourite ways of doing it. It's slightly less controlled, but I really enjoy the sensation of it. Just make sure you've soaped it up a bit. And then all you have to do is, so long as it's holding and it looks like it's felting, just rub it in your hands. And you'll find that what happens is it starts to shrink. Now, this isn't the way that the purists do wet felting, but I really enjoy it because I really like getting into the wool. And what I'm finding is that it's starting to shrink. So if I show you the previous samples, remember we started there? See, it's starting to go down. Yeah, so it's starting to shrink. So I'm going to keep working that for a bit. Another way you can do it is, move that a bit to the side, you can throw it because it's the actual physical process shrinks the wool back. And what you'll start to find is that the wool is shrinking. Okay, so I've finished the felting. It's nice and firm. There's no shift in it. We've got some lovely dimples going on. We can see how the wool has clamped down. So now I'm going to clean it up. So what we need to do is get the soapy water off. So just in some clean water, put it in as if you were cleaning out a dishcloth. So you're squeezing it through your fingers, and you'll find that that also helps to tidy it up. And there we are. Okay, so this is now dry. And if you know anything about butterflies, and especially if you know anything about the large blue, you'll recognise that the antennae and the little black spots are missing. It doesn't work brilliantly with wet felt. So how about going to one of our other worksheets and our other films and learning how to do needle felt, because that will do those spots beautifully. Or we've got another one which is all about stitch and applique, and on there you'll learn how to do satin stitch. So you could try doing those spots in stitch. Or how about, if you've got into your wet felt, how about trying some different butterflies? Things like the marsh fritillary and the brown hair streak, very endangered and worth doing again.